The story of Wild Bill Longley does not begin with a gun. It does not begin with a fight or a crime or a legendary moment. It begins with a child, a thin, curious, restless boy, born into a world already cracking under pressure. His real name was William Preston Longley, and he entered the world on October 6, 1851, in Austin County, Texas. He was not born into fame or danger. His family was simple, hardworking, and trying to survive like everyone else. But the land he was born on was not peaceful. It was a place where tension lived in the air, where arguments often ended with someone pulling a gun, and where the world felt like it was always one spark away from exploding. From the very first days of his life, the world around him was changing fast. America was moving toward the Civil War, and Texas was caught in the middle of anger, fear, and division. Even as a small child, Bill's ears heard more shouting than laughter. He saw more arguments than smiles. Every week, every month, the sense of danger grew stronger. By the time Bill could walk, he already understood one thing. Life in Texas was hard, and surviving it would be even harder. His parents did what they could. They tried to raise him with rules and respect, but the world outside their small home had rules of its own. In the open fields and muddy roads of Texas, people often solved problems with fists, knives, or bullets. Children grew up fast, and innocence never lasted long. Bill Longley was no different. He grew tall early, with sharp eyes and a restless energy. He loved adventure. He loved stories about courage and danger. And he loved feeling strong because, in Texas, strength was a shield. As the Civil War erupted in 1861, Bill was still a boy, but the conflict shaped his future in ways no book, no school, no parent could control. Texas was filled with fear, anger, and distrust. Soldiers marched through towns. Gunshots were heard at night. Groups of men formed patrols, deciding who belonged and who didn't. Violence was not distant or hidden. It was everywhere. Bill watched this world carefully. He saw men stand tall with guns on their belts. He saw how people listened when those men spoke. He saw how power worked in a place where laws were weak and tempers were strong. And slowly, something grew inside him. Not evil, not cruelty, but fascination. The gun, small, cold, and deadly, seemed like a key to respect, control, and fear. And to a young boy who felt powerless in a world filled with danger, that key looked irresistible. By the age of 12, Bill already knew how to shoot. By 14, he could hit cans off a fence post from across the yard. By 15, he was carrying a pistol as if it were part of him. Nobody questioned it. In Texas at that time, a teenage boy with a gun was not unusual. It was necessary. But with the gun came a feeling Bill had never had before. A feeling of importance. A feeling of strength. A feeling that he could make his own rules. And that feeling would shape the rest of his life. Around him, the world grew darker. After the Civil War ended in 1865, Texas fell into chaos. Old systems collapsed. New rules arrived. Anger between people grew even worse. Racial tensions exploded. Violence became common. Revenge became a language everyone understood. Bill Longley, now a teenager, absorbed all of it. He walked through towns where gunfights were normal. He listened to men brag about killings. He heard stories about heroes and villains, gunfighters who settled their problems with a quick draw and a cold stare. And deep down, Bill began to believe he could be one of them. Not because he wanted money, not because he wanted fame, but because the world made him feel like violence was the only way to matter. The young boy who once loved adventure slowly turned into a young man who wanted danger. The quiet curiosity in his eyes became something sharper, something bolder, something the world would later fear. By 16, Bill made a decision without ever speaking it aloud. He would not live a quiet life. He would not follow rules. He would carve his name into the world, even if he had to use bullets to do it. His first real steps into violence came fast and without warning. An argument, a flash of temper, a nervous hand, a panicked trigger pull. The moment lasted seconds, but the sound of the gunshot echoed through Bill's life forever. A man lay dead on the ground, and Bill felt something break inside him. Some men would run. Some would fall to their knees in fear. Some would cry, or collapse, or surrender. But Bill didn't. He stood there, breathing hard, trying to understand what he had done and More importantly, what he felt. Fear, power, regret, excitement. It was all mixed together, and Bill Longley, only a teenager, couldn't separate any of it. But one thing was clear. The line between life and death had disappeared. He had crossed it, and he could never go back. From that moment on, the boy named William Preston Longley faded away. In his place grew the shadow of a new name, a name whispered in fear, carried by rumor, spread by stories. Wild Bill Longley. And this was only the beginning. The sound of that first gunshot stayed with Bill Longley, long after the echo faded. In the quiet moments, when the wind blew across the Texas fields, or when night settled over the land, the memory returned. He could still see the man fall. He could still feel the tremble in his hand, the burn in his chest, and the strange mixture of fear and pride that rushed through him. He was only 16, but in Texas, 16 was old enough to be feared, or hated. In the days that followed, Bill tried to act normal. He ate meals with his family, fed the animals, walked into town like nothing had changed. But everyone around him felt the shift. His voice grew sharper. His eyes held a new hardness. The way he touched his gun was different, gentle, but ready, like a man who believed it would save him from anything. People talked in whispers. Did you hear what the Longley boy did? He shot a man, they say. He's trouble now. Mark my words. Bill heard the whispers, and he felt something inside him grow, something dangerous. People were finally noticing him. People were finally afraid. And for a young man who had felt powerless most of his life, fear from others felt like power. But power comes with a price. Soon, Bill began to attract the wrong kind of attention. Older men who lived rough lives, who fought, drank, and killed without hesitations, saw something familiar in him. They saw potential. They saw a young man who could be shaped, used, or pushed into darker paths. Bill started spending time with them. Tough men, angry men, men who preferred their own law to anyone else's. They taught him how to shoot faster, how to keep his back to a wall, how to read danger in a stranger's eyes, how to survive in a world where justice was slow, but bullets were quick. Texas was going through one of the most violent periods in its history. After the Civil War, the land was filled with tension, especially between former Confederate sympathizers and the newly freed black population. Conflicts erupted almost daily. Violence often went unpunished. And Bill, young and reckless, got pulled right into the middle of it. He joined groups of men who rode through rural areas, claiming they were protecting the land, but their version of protection was cruel. They targeted people they didn't like. They punished anyone who challenged their beliefs. Sometimes, they simply looked for trouble, because trouble was easier than peace. Bill was not leading these groups. He wasn't planning their raids. He wasn't the mastermind, but he was there. He was riding with them, and soon he was shooting with them. Some of his earliest confirmed killings came from these violent encounters. He shot men he barely knew, sometimes out of anger, sometimes out of fear, sometimes because the men beside him encouraged it, and each time he pulled the trigger, something inside him grew colder. His name began spreading beyond his hometown, not as a hero, not as a legend, but as a dangerous young gunman who would kill without hesitation. Still, Bill didn't see himself as a villain. Not yet. He believed he was part of the world around him, a world that rewarded the fastest draw, the boldest attitude, and the hardest heart. But deep down, something about the killings bothered him. Not enough to make him stop. Not enough to change his path. But the memories would come back in his dreams, in the silence, in the moments when even he could not escape himself. The turning point came a year later. Bill got into an argument with a man in town. It started over an insults, small, foolish, the kind of thing most people would ignore. But Bill wasn't most people anymore. His temper had become quicker than his judgment. His pride had become more dangerous than any enemy. The man insulted him again, louder this time, in front of others. People turned to watch. Eyes burned into Bill's skin. Someone laughed, and Bill snapped. Without thinking, he pulled his pistol and fired. The man fell instantly. The street went silent. Bill didn't run at first. He stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the man whose life he had ended. But as townsfolk rushed toward him, some shouting, some screaming, Bill finally understood the trouble he was in. He ran into the fields, heart pounding, mind racing. Behind him, voices shouted blame. Ahead of him, only darkness and open land waited. That night, hiding among the trees, Bill had time to think. And for the first time, he felt fear not of dying, but of being caught. He knew the law would not forgive him this time. He knew people in town wanted him gone dead or alive. He knew that his path now led in only one direction. Outlaw. He could never go home again. He could never return to the life he once knew. The young boy who tried to fit into the world was gone forever. In his place was a drifter, a fugitive, a teenager wanted for murder. And soon, that teenager would become a man hunted across Texas, a man whose name spread faster than the wind, a man who believed wrongly that the only way to survive was to keep killing. This was the beginning of Wild Bill Longley's new identity. Not a hero, not a legend, not a gunman, a runaway, a young man spiraling into a life he could never escape. After the second killing, Bill Longley no longer had a home. He no longer had a place to return to, no warm bed, no family waiting for him, and no future that looked anything like a normal life. He became exactly what the people in town whispered he would become: a runaway, a drifter, an outlaw. For a young man barely 17, the world suddenly felt huge. The land stretched endlessly across Texas. Dusty trails, lonely roads, and empty plains became the only places he felt safe. But the world that seemed so open was also full of danger, and Bill had to learn quickly how to survive in it. He slept where he could, sometimes in barns, sometimes behind saloons, sometimes in abandoned cabins with broken windows and creaking floors. He carried food when he found it, but many nights he went hungry. The life he once knew, the simple days of chores and warm meals, were gone forever. But the gun stayed with him, always. He kept it close, even in sleep, his hand never far from the handle. It was his protection, his comfort, and the one thing he trusted in a world where trust was dangerous as weeks turned into months. Bill began meeting other drifters, men who lived outside the law, men who traveled from town to town with no purpose except to stay alive. Some of them were criminals, some were harmless wanderers, some were worse than Bill could ever imagine. They taught him things, small things at first: how to move quietly, how to spot trouble before it arrived, how to read the expressions of men who were lying or planning something violent. But they also taught him darker lessons, lessons about survival at any cost, lessons about fear as a weapon, lessons about how people respected a man with a quick draw and a cold stare. And Bill listened. He learned. He absorbed every piece of advice like a sponge, because now survival was all he had. Bill tried to keep a low profile. He tried to stay out of the way of lawmen or anyone who might recognize him. But trouble had a way of following him, like a shadow he couldn't escape. One day, in a small settlement, Bill got into a disagreement with a group of men he barely knew. They accused him of cheating in a game of cards. The accusation wasn't true, but truth mattered less than anger. One man stood up, then another. Hands reached for guns. Bill didn't think. He reacted. In seconds, a gunfight exploded inside the small, smoky room. Dust jumped from wooden walls as bullets hit them. Chairs broke, glasses shattered, and men shouted in panic. When the chaos ended, 2 men lay dead on the floor, and Bill Longley was the only one standing. He didn't stay to explain. He didn't try to defend himself. He didn't wait for justice. He ran again. But this time, he ran with something worse than fear. He ran with experience. The more Bill ran, the deeper he sank into violence. The line between right and wrong faded until he could barely see it anymore. He didn't look at the faces of the men he shot. He didn't ask why things escalated. He didn't think about families, or guilt, or consequences. He just kept moving. Because movement meant survival. Stillness meant death. Texas during this time was not peaceful. Law enforcement was weak. Violence was constant. Tensions between groups, Confederates, Union supporters, freedmen, and outsiders created a landscape where anger was always ready to explode. In many places, the law was simply whoever carried the biggest gun. And Bill Longley, fast with his draw and reckless with his judgment, fit right into this broken world. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a legendary gunfighter yet. He was just a young man shaped by violence, pushed forward by fear, ego, and the belief that stopping meant dying. A glimpse of peace. And why it didn't last there were moments when Bill tried to find something like peace. Times when he worked small jobs, helping on ranches, fixing fences, or tending cattle. For brief periods, he tried to live quietly, but trouble always found him. Sometimes, it was because people recognized him as the teenager who killed men in Central Texas. Sometimes, it was because he couldn't stay calm when insulted, and sometimes it was because life on the run had made him suspicious, jumpy, and always ready to pull his gun first. Many men in Texas drank heavily to forget their past. Bill drank to silence the noise inside his head, the noise of guilt, fear, loneliness, and the belief that his life could never be normal again. The more he drank, the quicker his temper became. The quicker his temper became, the faster his hand moved to his gun. And once again, he found himself on the wrong side of the law. Another killing, another accusation, another escape that old friends no longer recognized him. New acquaintances kept their distance. To most, he was not a man. They saw him as a storm walking on two legs, unpredictable and deadly. As years passed, Bill's name began to spread across Texas. Stories traveled faster than horses. Some were true, some were exaggerated, some were completely invented by men who loved telling tales around campfires. But no matter the version, one thing remained the same. Wild Bill Longley was dangerous. His reputation grew, not because he wanted fame, but because he left a trail of fear wherever he went. By now, he had killed enough men that the number didn't matter anymore. People stopped asking why he killed. They only asked where he was going next and how to avoid him. Bill felt the weight of this new identity. Sometimes it thrilled him. Sometimes it terrified him. But mostly, it swallowed him whole. There was no turning back. No redemption waiting on the horizon. No chance to undo the choices he made as a teenager. The boy he used to be was gone. The man he was becoming was far worse, and the world would soon learn just how deadly Wild Bill Longley could be. Wild Bill Longley had lived on the run for years, drifting from one dusty town to another. But by the time he reached his early 20s, something inside him had shifted. The confidence he once felt as a young gunfighter was beginning to crumble. Life as a fugitive was wearing him down. Every sunrise felt like a warning. Every sound behind him felt like danger. He was tired, not tired from walking or hiding, but tired from living every moment in fear. He knew that sooner or later, his luck would run out. If the law didn't catch him, another gunman would. And if another gunman didn't, his own recklessness would die in a strange twist of survival. Bill decided to do something no one expected. He joined the United States Army. To him, the Army looked like a chance to disappear. A place where names didn't matter, only uniforms. A place where he could hide from the law, from himself, and from the reputation that followed him like a shadow. When Bill arrived at the Army post, he kept his head down. He gave a false name. He avoided eye contact. He acted like a man trying to bury the past. The officers saw him as just another young Texan looking for steady pay. They had no idea he was one of the most feared gunmen in the state. Life in the Army was different. Strict, controlled, predictable. Bill woke at dawn. He trained. He marched. He cleaned his rifle. He followed orders. For the first time in years, he lived by rules. And for a short moment, those rules gave him peace. He even made a few friends, young soldiers who didn't know his history. They saw him as quiet, serious, and skilled with a gun. He wasn't loud. He didn't brag. He simply did the work. But old habits don't stay buried for long. One night, after hours of drinking, Bill got into an argument with another soldier. The dispute started small, but Bill's temper, sharpened by years of fear and violence, ignited too quickly. A shove, a threat, a hand reaching toward a weapon. And Bill reacted before he thought. He didn't kill the soldier, but he came close enough that the officers realized he was trouble. They watched him more carefully, noticed his nervous behavior, and began asking questions. Bill started to panic. The Army was supposed to be a hiding place, not another trap. He felt cornered, suffocated by discipline, and constantly afraid someone would discover who he really was. Then, one morning, without warning or permission, Bill deserted. He took his horse, a rifle, his pistol, and vanished into the open land. Desertion was a serious crime, but to Bill, Returning to the wilderness felt almost familiar, like stepping back into old boots that still fit too well. He traveled for days, crossing rough terrain, avoiding towns, and keeping his distance from anyone who might report him. The loneliness of this life, however, was beginning to do something strange to him. It made him restless. It made him angry. It made him slip deeper into the mindset of a man who believed the world was always after him. Every stranger looked like an enemy. Every night sounded like a threat. Every shadow felt like it hid someone ready to kill him. And in this mental storm, Bill made one mistake after another. During this time, he came across a small camp of men travelers who were resting along the trail. They offered Bill food, warmth, and a place to sleep. They treated him like a friend, unaware of the danger he carried inside him. But something went wrong. Maybe it was a harsh comment. Maybe someone looked at him the wrong way. Maybe Bill's fear twisted innocent words into threats. Whatever it was, Bill lost control by morning. 2 of the men were dead, and Bill was gone, leaving behind a scene that only added to the growing legend of Wild Bill Longley. The killings were senseless. There was no money involved, no plan, no reason. Just fear, just anger, just a man losing control of himself. News of the murders spread quickly. Texas was full of gossip, and every story made Bill sound bigger, faster, and deadlier. Some said he killed for sport. Some said he could hit a target before most men even blinked. Some called him the fastest gun in Texas. Bill did nothing to correct the stories. In fact, he began to believe some of them himself. The more people feared him, the more he felt like he mattered. He told exaggerated tales of his own adventures. Sometimes he claimed he killed 30 men, sometimes 40, sometimes more. He wasn't proud of the truth. He was proud of the myth. And that myth was growing. As Bill continued drifting, he kept encountering the same problem. Anywhere he went, violence followed. Sometimes he started it. Sometimes others did, out of fear or revenge. But either way, bullets always ended the argument. Bill Longley became a man living in constant conflict with the world, with others, and with himself. He had no peace. He had no rest. And the more he ran, the more he lost the pieces of himself that once made him human. The boy who wanted adventure was gone. The teenager who wanted respect was gone. All that remained was a man racing toward his own destruction. And deeper inside him, a truth he refused to face was growing louder. He was becoming everything he once feared. Bill Longley rode across Texas like a storm that refused to end. Some storms bring rain, others bring wind, but Bill brought fear. Every town he entered felt the same shift in the air. People lowered their voices. Doors closed earlier. Men kept their hands close to their belts, because the stories of Wild Bill Longley had grown far beyond the truth. Some tales claimed he killed men at 20 paces without missing. Others said he could draw his gun in less than a second. A few even called him the fastest gun in the West. Bill didn't correct these stories. In fact, he encouraged them. To him, fear was protection. If people feared him, fewer men would challenge him, or so he thought. But fear doesn't protect forever. Sometimes it attracts danger instead, and soon Bill's reputation would bring him face to face with the moment that changed his life forever. As Bill drifted, he often tried to hide by working odd jobs. Some ranchers hired him for a few days. Others fired him after a few hours. Not because he was lazy, but because he was too unpredictable. One moment, he was quiet and helpful. The next, his eyes flashed with anger, and his hand brushed his gun for no reason. Years of running had made him suspicious of everyone and everything. He slept with one eye open. He ate fast, always scanning the room. His nerves were tight as wire. And over time, the weight of every decision he made began pulling him down. Still, Bill kept running. Running from the law, running from enemies, running from the crimes he refused to think about. But the one thing he could never run from was himself. In 1875, Bill returned to an area near where he grew up. Perhaps he felt nostalgic. Perhaps he felt lonely. Or maybe he believed that enough time had passed for people to forgive or forget. But Texas doesn't forget easily, especially when blood is involved. Rumors began spreading that Bill was nearby. And when rumors spread in Texas, men with guns were never far behind. Bill should have left. He should have kept moving. But he stayed. Maybe he wanted to see familiar faces. Maybe he missed the place where he first felt like he mattered. Maybe a part of him hoped he could start over. But fate had a different plan. One morning, Bill crossed paths with Wilson Anderson, a man Bill had known since childhood. They weren't enemies in the beginning. They grew up in the same community, played in the same fields, and lived through the same rough times. But old arguments, old grudges, and the anger of the past still lived between their families. Words were exchanged. Sharp, bitter words. Neither man wanted to step back. Wilson believed Bill was dangerous. Bill believed Wilson had wronged him years ago, and neither man trusted the other. The argument grew louder. Voices rose. Faces grew red dot, and then Bill did what he had done so many times before. He reached for his gun. In seconds, the fight was over. Wilson Anderson fell to the ground, mortally wounded. There was no duel, no fair draw, no heroism, just anger, just impulse, just another tragic moment in a life full of bad decisions. But this time, something was different. This time, Bill felt it as Bill stood over the fallen man. Something sharp pierced him, not from a gun, not from a blade, but from inside. It was regret. Real regret. Wilson wasn't a stranger. He wasn't a drunken cowboy in a saloon. He wasn't a nameless traveler on the road. He was someone Bill had known for years. Someone who reminded him of the boy he used to be. The boy he left behind long before he ever became Wild Bill. For the first time in years, the weight of everything hit him at once. The killings, the running, the anger, the lies, the myth he had created, a myth that now controlled his life. Bill felt the truth hit him like a bullet. He didn't just kill a man. He killed the last piece of his old life. And from that moment on, something inside him began to crumble. Bill knew the law would come after him harder than ever. This was no simple shooting. This was murder, clear, undeniable, and witnessed. Texas Rangers were already searching for him. Reward posters appeared with his name. Men who once feared him now wanted justice. Even the outlaws who admired him kept their distance. Bill rode as fast as he could, trying to outrun the guilt screaming inside his head. But guilt is faster than horses. It catches a man even in the quiet moments, especially in the quiet moments. He drank more, he slept less. He trusted no one. Every day, he looked older, more tired, more hollow. The lines on his face deepened. The fire in his eyes dimmed. He was becoming a ghost who couldn't forget what he had done. Ironically, while Bill was falling apart inside, his legend outside was exploding. Stories of the fearless killer spread everywhere. Men told tales of Bill fighting 10 men at once. Others claimed he survived ambushes no one else could. Newspapers exaggerated his actions. Saloon storytellers added dramatic flair. Even children repeated the stories in whispers, the way kids speak of monsters. But none of them knew the truth. The legend was growing, but the man was breaking. Bill Longley was no longer running for adventure. He was running because he had nowhere left to go. He was trapped between the myth he created and the guilt he could never escape. And as the Rangers closed in, as the law tightened around him, as fate prepared its final hand, Bill's story was about to turn toward its darkest chapter. After the killing of Wilson Anderson, the world around Bill Longley changed, faster than he could run, faster than he could lie, and faster than even his quick draw could save him. This time, the reaction was different. There was no confusion about who fired the gun, no doubt about what happened, no rumor that could twist the truth. Everyone knew it was Bill, and everyone wanted justice. The Texas Rangers, the toughest lawmen in Texas, received the order to hunt him down. These were not ordinary sheriffs or small-town deputies. These were seasoned fighters, veterans of Indian wars, men who knew the land better than most outlaws. They were calm, patient hunters, and they were coming for him. Bill rode harder than he had ever ridden before. Through dusty plains, thick brush, and sunburned roads, he pushed his horse to its limits. He changed direction often, slept in hidden canyons, and rode only at night. But Texas was wide, and the Rangers knew its every corner. They tracked footprints, questioned locals, followed the smallest clues. Every time Bill thought he escaped, he would see dust rising behind him, or hear a rider's distant whistle, or wake up to a rumor that Rangers were nearby. He was no longer running from trouble. He was running from justice. And justice was gaining on him. Each day added more pressure. Each night stole more sleep. The fear inside him grew like a sickness, stealing his strength and twisting his mind. His hands shook when he tried to rest. His eyes darted at every sound. He felt hunted, watched, and cornered even when no one was there. The man who once believed he could survive anything was now struggling to survive himself. One evening, as the sun fell behind distant hills, Bill stopped at a small watering hole. The horse drank deeply. Bill filled his canteen. Then he heard it, hoofbeats. Slow, steady, confident, dot. Not the sound of a farmer, not the sound of a traveler, the sound of men who are not afraid. Bill dropped flat to the ground, crawling behind a rock. He watched 3 men approach. Wide hats, dust-covered coats, rifles ready. Texas Rangers. They were not rushing. They were not shouting. They were scanning the land calmly, like men who already knew their prey was near. Bill's heart hammered in his chest as he crawled farther away. The Rangers stopped exactly where he had been standing minutes before. One of them got off his horse, bent down, and studied the ground. "Fresh tracks," he said. Another added, "He can't be far." Bill's breath froze in his throat. Every muscle in his body tightened. If he made noise, he would be caught. If he moved wrong, he would be seen. If he ran too soon, he would be shot. For almost 10 minutes, he stayed still, squeezing his breath into silent pulses. At last, the Rangers mounted their horses and rode east. Believing Bill had gone that way, the moment they disappeared, Bill ran west. Not walked. Not rode. Ran. He didn't stop until his legs burned and the night swallowed him whole. Surviving that close call didn't give Bill courage. It broke him even further. He knew the Rangers were skilled. He knew they would keep coming. He knew they would never stop. And deep down, he knew he couldn't outrun them forever. He drifted from camp to camp, from shack to barn, avoiding every town unless he was starving. He grew thinner, dirtier, and more desperate. His beard grew wild. His eyes lost their old spark. He began drinking heavily. Alcohol numbed the fear for a few hours, but it also clouded his judgment. When he was drunk, he talked too much. He bragged about killing men. He claimed he shot 40 people. He told strangers he was the fastest gun in Texas. Some listeners believed him. Some just nodded silently, and some reported his location to lawmen. And so the chase continued. Despite everything, there were fragile moments when Bill showed signs of the boy he used to be. Sometimes he helped travelers fix a wagon wheel. Sometimes he shared his food with people in need. Sometimes he sat by a fire, silent, staring at the stars with a look of longing. But kindness couldn't stay long in the life of a hunted man. Every good choice was quickly overshadowed by another act of violence. His temper was too quick. His fear was too strong. His life was too tangled in death. Once, during a drunken night in a small camp, a man insulted him. Nothing major, nothing worth blood, but Bill reacted with the same reflex that had destroyed his life again and again. He shot the man dead, and as the body fell, Bill whispered something that no one heard. "I didn't mean to," but meaning didn't matter anymore. Only actions did, and Bill's actions left another body in the dirt, while Bill sank deeper into fear and regret. His legend continued to grow. People claimed he killed men for looking at him wrong. Others said he once shot a man off a horse at 100 yards. A few believed he survived being hanged, a story Bill himself sometimes encouraged. The truth was simpler. Bill Longley was not a fearless hero. He was a frightened, angry young man surrounded by violence from childhood, a man who didn't know how to break free from the world that shaped him. But legends don't care about truth. The stories made Bill sound like a mythical figure, half man, half nightmare. And those stories only made the Rangers more determined. By late 1877, Bill's life had become a trap circle. No matter where he ran, someone recognized him. No matter where he hid, the law came close. The net was tightening. The walls were closing. Every sunrise felt like a countdown. And Bill knew, even if he didn't want to admit it, that his story was heading toward an ending he could not escape. His next decision, his next encounter, his next desperate choice would lead directly to his capture. and the most feared gunslinger in Texas, would soon face the one thing he never outran: his own past. As the year 1877 approached its final months, Wild Bill Longley was more ghost than man. His clothes were worn, his beard untrimmed, and his body tired from years of running. He moved through the world like a shadow, silent, restless, and always looking over his shoulder. But even ghosts cannot hide forever. The Texas Rangers had tracked him for months. Every tip, every rumor, every whisper brought them closer. And Bill, weakened by fear and exhaustion, was too slow to stay ahead. The story of his capture would not happen in a grand showdown. There would be no blazing gunfight, no dramatic duel. Instead, it would be a moment shaped by the simple truth that even the fastest gunslinger cannot outrun time. Bill eventually found himself in DeSoto Parish, Louisiana, far from the Texas lands he once roamed. He believed the distance would protect him. He believed the Rangers might give up the chase. And he believed that perhaps fate had decided to give him one last chance. He stayed with a local family for a short time. They were kind, offering him food and a place to sleep. They did not ask too many questions, and Bill did not offer too many answers. He used a fake name again. He claimed he was a cattle hand looking for work. He tried to blend in, lowering his hat and avoiding attention. But Bill's biggest enemy was not the law. It was his mouth. He got comfortable. Too comfortable. Late at night, after drinking, he began telling stories. Stories about shootouts, stories about Texas, stories about his fast draw and the men he killed. At first, the family thought he was exaggerating, but then small details matched stories they had heard from traveling newspapers. They remembered the Rangers looking for a man named Longley, dangerous, unpredictable, wanted for multiple murders. Slowly, suspicion grew. And one night, when Bill was asleep, someone made the decision that changed everything. They sent word to the authorities. When the message reached Texas Ranger Major John Armstrong, he reacted quickly. He knew Longley was dangerous. He knew the outlaw had escaped before. He knew one mistake could mean death. So Armstrong planned carefully, quietly, smartly. He didn't rush in with a large group. He didn't make noise. He didn't give Bill a chance to run. He prepared a silent circle, tightening around the small house where Bill slept. Before dawn, several riders approached. Their horses stepped lightly. Their voices stayed low. Their guns were ready, but their movements were controlled. The Rangers had one goal: capture Wild Bill Longley alive, because Texas wanted him to face justice, not escape, not be killed in another shootout, not disappear into a legend. Inside the house, Bill slept deeply, the sleep of a man finally too tired to fear anything. When the Rangers reached the yard, the world was still. A cold morning wind brushed the leaves. Birds had not yet begun to sing. One Ranger walked to the door. Another watched the window. Two more took positions behind the house. Major Armstrong stepped forward and knocked at first. Nothing happened. Then there was movement inside, slow, confused, half-awake movement. Bill approached the door. Still groggy, still unaware. He opened it halfway, and for the first time in years, he froze. Outside stood lawmen, prepared, guns raised, eyes focused. In that instant, the truth hit him. He had run out of road. He reached for his gun. His instincts told him to fight, to draw, to become the legend he told others he was. But exhaustion stopped him. Fear stopped him. Realization stopped him. Before he could act, Armstrong's voice cut through the cold air. "William Preston Longley, you're under arrest." Bill's hand hovered over his gun. His breath was unsteady. His eyes darted left and right, looking for a way out. There was none. For the first time in years, Bill Longley made a choice that wasn't guided by anger or pride. He surrendered. Slowly, he lifted his hands. The Rangers moved forward, took his weapons, and placed chains on his wrists. The most feared outlaw in Texas was caught without a shot fired. The return journey was long. The Rangers rode steadily, keeping Bill under close watch. He didn't speak much. He didn't fight. He didn't threaten. He was quiet, too quiet. Some Rangers expected him to attempt escape. Some expected a sudden attack. Some expected him to run as soon as he saw an opening. But Bill did none of those things. Instead, he stared at the horizon, lost in thought. Maybe he was thinking about the boy he once was. Maybe he was thinking about the men he killed. Maybe he was thinking about the lies he told to feel important. Maybe he was thinking about Wilson Anderson, the friend he should never have shot. Or maybe he was thinking about the end he knew was coming. Word of his capture spread quickly across Texas. People gathered in towns, discussing the news. Did they really catch him? Alive? I heard he killed 30 men. Maybe he'll escape again. But the truth was simple. The legend was much bigger than the man. When Bill arrived back in Texas, he looked nothing like the fierce outlaw in the stories. He looked thin, tired, and defeated. His eyes held no fire. His shoulders carried years of regret. He was no longer Wild Bill Longley. He was just William Preston Longley, a man facing judgment. His trial would come soon. His fate would be sealed. And his final chapter was waiting quietly on the horizon. The boy who wanted to be powerful. The young man who became feared. The outlaw who created his own legend was about to face the end he tried so hard to outrun. When Wild Bill Longley reached Texas in chains, the world did not greet him with fear. There were no crowds running away, no gunmen challenging him, no whispers of danger. Instead, people stared at him with something else, curiosity. Many expected a monster, a tall, frightening gunslinger with fire in his eyes. But the man who stepped off the ranger's horse was thin, tired, and hollow. His clothes hung loose on his body. His face was pale. His eyes looked bruised by regret, not rage. For the first time, the myth of Wild Bill Longley did not match the man standing before them. Bill was taken to the jail in Giddings, Texas, the same region where he had grown up, the same place where he once played as a boy, the same place he fled as a young killer. The irony was heavy. Inside his small cell, Bill sat on a wooden bench and stared at the walls for hours. Sometimes he whispered to himself. Sometimes he smiled sadly. Sometimes he covered his face with his hands, trying to block out the memories that kept rising inside him. The guards watched him carefully. They expected violence or escape attempts after all. This was the Wild West's most dangerous outlaw. But Bill did nothing. He didn't fight the guards. He didn't threaten anyone. He didn't brag about his crimes. He simply waited. When the day of his trial arrived, the courtroom filled quickly. People from nearby towns came to see the man whose name had traveled across Texas in whispers and stories. Bill entered quietly, hands chained, eyes lowered. He didn't look like a killer anymore. He looked like a man who finally understood the weight of his actions. The judge read the charges. Murder of Wilson Anderson, previous violent acts prior, escapes violations of the law in multiple counties. Bill stood silent as each charge echoed through the room. He did not deny his past. He did not argue. He did not claim innocence. But when asked if he wanted to speak, Bill raised his head. What came out was not the voice of the fierce outlaw people imagined. It was the voice of a tired young man just 27 years old, who had lived far too fast. "I regret what I did," he said softly. "I wish I could take it back." Some in the room believed him. Most did not. In the Wild West, regret rarely washed away blood. While in jail, Bill began writing letters. Some were to old friends, some to family, some to newspapers. What he wrote was strange, emotional, and sometimes confusing. In some letters, he apologized. He talked about loneliness, fear, and the guilt he carried. In others, he bragged again, claiming he killed 32 men, claiming he was the fastest gun alive, claiming he lived a life filled with heroic gunfights. It was as if two men lived inside him. The scared young man who regretted everything, the outlaw who refused to let his legend die. These letters would later become valuable pieces of history, showing the world not a fearless killer, but a man torn between truth and myth. The trial did not last long. The evidence was clear. Witnesses spoke. The community demanded justice. The judge finally delivered the sentence. William Preston Longley, you are to be hanged by the neck until dead. A soft gasp moved through the courtroom. Some nodded in approval. Some looked away. Some whispered prayers. Bill stood still, his face expressionless, but his eyes said everything. Fear, sadness, acceptance, and perhaps a small bit of relief. For the first time, the running was over. In the weeks that followed, Bill waited for the day of his execution. He spent long hours lying on his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes he sang hymns quietly. Sometimes he talked to the guards. Sometimes he simply sat in silence, hands folded, head bowed. He asked for a preacher. He asked for forgiveness. He asked for his family to know he was sorry. One guard later said he wasn't wild anymore. He was just a boy who wished he had made different choices. Bill gained weight again. His face softened. His voice grew calmer. It was as if the end gave him a kind of peace he had never known before. The day before the end, day before his execution, Bill wrote one final letter. It was emotional, honest, and raw. "I was not the gunfighter they say I was," he admitted. "I was foolish. I was proud. I thought being feared made me a man. It did not. I am sorry for every life I ruined, most of all my own." He ended the letter with a simple line: "I hope God will forgive me." For a man who once bragged about killing dozens, these words showed a different truth deep inside. He knew the legend he built had destroyed him. As the execution day approached, the small town grew tense. People gathered early. Some traveled miles just to watch. Public executions were rare, but curiosity was powerful. Many wanted to see if Wild Bill Longley would die bravely. Others wanted to see if he would beg for mercy. Some wanted to see if he would try to escape again. But one thing was clear. The end of Wild Bill Longley was not just the end of a man. It was the end of a legend created by fear, anger, and the harsh world of the Wild West. The next sunrise would close the story forever. The sun rose slowly, on October 11th, 1878, as if the sky itself hesitated to begin the day. It was the day Wild Bill Longley would die. The day the young man who once believed he could outshoot fate would finally meet it, inside his small jail cell in Giddings, Texas. The air felt heavy. The town was quiet at first, but the silence was misleading. People had traveled for miles, away, farmers, ranchers, townsfolk, and curious strangers, all gathering outside for the execution of one of the most talked about outlaws in the state. Bill Longley sat alone, hands resting loosely on his knees. He was 27 years old, but in the dim light he looked much older, tired, worn, and strangely peaceful. For the first time in his life, there was nowhere to run, and he accepted that. A guard brought him breakfast: simple eggs, bread, and coffee. Bill thanked him quietly. He ate slowly, thoughtfully, as if each bite carried meaning. He wasn't hungry. He was simply finishing the last human ritual he had left. When he was done, he folded his hands together and whispered a prayer. No one knew exactly what he said, but one guard heard a few words. "Lord, forgive the fool I was." It was honest, soft, and far from the voice of the wild outlaw the world imagined. Just after sunrise, a preacher entered the cell. He carried a small Bible and a calm voice. "William," he said gently, "how is your spirit today?" Bill gave a faint smile. "I've made my peace. I'm ready." The preacher read a passage about mercy and forgiveness. Bill listened quietly, eyes lowered, hands steady. He asked for a prayer that God would protect the families he had hurt. A rare moment of clarity from a man who had once lived without thinking of consequences. For a few minutes, the cell felt warm, peaceful, almost safe. But outside, the gallows waited. The walk to the gallows when the sheriff finally arrived. He opened the cell door slowly. "Bill," he said, "it's time." Bill nodded. No fear, no panic, no begging, only acceptance. He stood, straightened his clothes, and took a deep breath. The chains on his wrists clinked softly as he walked out of the cell and into the sunlight. The crowd gasped when they saw him. They expected a wild-eyed killer, a monster, a man eager to fight death. But the man walking to the gallows looked calm, quiet, almost gentle. A man who had finally grown tired of running, lying, and pretending. Someone whispered, "That's Wild Bill. He looks like a preacher." Another said, "He's just a boy." For the first time, people saw William Preston Longley, not the legend they had imagined. The gallows stood tall and wooden, the rope swaying slightly in the morning breeze. Bill climbed the steps carefully, as if each step was part of his final lesson. He reached the platform. The sheriff removed his shackles. "Do you have anything to say before the sentence is carried out?" the sheriff asked. Bill looked at the crowd, hundreds of faces, staring back at him. Some angry, some curious, some sympathetic. he cleared his throat and spoke. "I hope you all take a lesson from my life. Don't follow the road I followed. I was foolish. I lived wrong, and this is the end of that road." The crowd fell silent. Then he added, with a sad, soft voice, "I forgive those who brought me here, and I pray they forgive me too." Those were not the words of a fearless outlaw. They were the words of a man finally telling the truth. The hangman stepped forward. He placed a black hood over Bill's head. Bill didn't resist. He placed the rope around Bill's neck. Bill didn't tremble. He stepped back and waited for the sheriff's signal. Time seemed to stop. Under the hood, Bill whispered one final sentence. A sentence the preacher standing nearby heard clearly. "Into your hands, Lord, I leave my soul." His voice was steady, brave, human. The sheriff raised his hand. The trapdoor dropped. The crowd gasped. Some turned away. Some cried. Some stared. The legend of Wild Bill Longley ended in a single, final moment. But what mattered wasn't the fall. It was the truth behind the legend. A truth many had never heard. Until the end, Bill was not the fearless killer he claimed to be. He was not a hero of the Wild West. He was a troubled, frightened young man who grew up in violence and became trapped in the myth he created for himself. His death was not dramatic or heroic. It was sad, quiet, and strangely peaceful. When his body was lowered, the town grew silent. The crowd slowly dispersed, taking with them their own version of the story. Some left believing he deserved it. Some left feeling pity. Some left realizing that legends are often lies told by broken men. Bill was buried in a simple grave near Giddings. No expensive tombstone. No grand ceremony. Just a marker with his name. Over time, his story faded into history books, campfire tales, and whispered conversations about the Wild West. But the truth remained. Wild Bill Longley was not remembered for his kills. He was remembered for his final honesty and the reminder that even the most feared outlaw is still human. When Wild Bill Longley's body was placed into the simple wooden coffin, the world outside continued on. Horses trotted along dusty streets. Children played near fences. Women hung laundry in the morning sun. Life moved forward steadily, normally just as it always had. But inside the hearts of those who had witnessed his final moments, something lingered, a strange mixture of sorrow, relief, and deep reflection. The legend had ended, but the story was far from over. Bill was buried in Giddings, Texas, not far from where he grew up. His grave was not grand. It held no statue, no stone angel, no shining tribute. Just a simple burial. A wooden marker, a name carved into it. William Preston Longley, 1851 to 1878. Visitors came and went. Some prayed for him. Some spat on the ground. Some simply stood quietly, trying to understand the life of a man who had lived fast, died young, and left behind a trail of confusion, fear, and regret. For many, he remained a monster. For others, a tragedy. And for a few, he was a reminder of how easily a person can become lost in a world filled with anger and violence. In the weeks after his death, stories spread faster than wind. Some said he died bravely. Some claimed he confessed to more murders. Some even whispered that he survived the hanging, a rumor that Bill himself would have loved. But the truth was simple. He died like any other man. Still, storytellers of the Old West never cared much for truth. And so, the myth of Wild Bill Longley grew again. They said he could shoot a coin out of the air. They said he killed more than 30 men. They said his ghost walked the trails at night, still hunting enemies. None of it was true. But legends rarely need truth to survive. And in time, Bill became another character in the great American story of the Wild West, a tale told around campfires, in saloons, and later in books and movies. But who was the real Bill Longley? Not the hero, not the fearless gunslinger, not the unstoppable outlaw people imagined. He was a poor, angry boy born into a violent world, a boy who learned the wrong lessons, a boy who thought fear gave him strength. He grew up in post-Civil War Texas, where laws were weak and hatred was strong. He became shaped by conflicts he didn't fully understand. And once he tasted power, the kind that came from holding a gun, he chased it blindly. Even as it destroyed him, Bill was not born evil. He was born into chaos, and chaos raised him. Some who knew Bill as a child remembered him as a curious boy with a quick smile, a boy who liked horses, a boy who laughed easily, a boy who had a future. But as he grew older, that boy disappeared. Violence replaced innocence. Pride replaced sense. Fear replaced hope. A former neighbor once said, he could have been a good man, but the world wasn't good to him, and he wasn't good back. Another said, the legend was loud, but the real Bill was a lonely soul. His mother, heartbroken, died believing her son had simply been lost to the world, a life twisted by circumstances too big for him to escape. Many Western outlaws became folk heroes, admired by young boys and men who dreamed of freedom and adventure. But Bill Longley is not admired. His story does not inspire. It warns about the danger of growing up in violence. It warns about pride becoming a prison. It warns about how lies we tell ourselves can become chains. It warns that every action, even one small mistake, can start a fire that burns a lifetime. Bill's life shows that even the strongest gun cannot fight the truth. And the truth was simple. He was a broken man who broke others. Years after Bill's death, historians looked closely at his life. They studied records, letters, and witness testimonies. They discovered the truth behind the exaggerations. Bill did not kill 32 men. He may have killed 8, possibly 13, but he added to the number himself, wanting fame, wanting respect, wanting to be remembered. He shaped his own legend with lies, and the world accepted it because legends are easier to love than the messy truth. But history now tells the truth. Wild Bill Longley was not a great gunfighter. He was not skilled. He was not glamorous. He was a troubled young man who failed to control his anger and fear. His story became famous not because of greatness, but because of tragedy. The final reflection, when people today look back at the Wild West, they see two kinds of figures. Heroes, those who protected towns, kept order, and fought for justice. Outlaws, those who lived fast, fought hard, and died young. But Bill Longley does not fit neatly in either group. He is a reminder of what happens when a person grows up in a world without guidance. A reminder of how easy it is to fall when no one teaches you how to stand. A reminder that legends, no matter how loud, cannot hide the truth forever. In the end, the Wild West did not celebrate Bill Longley. It learned from him. His story echoes a message that survives even today. Fear is not strength. Violence is not power. And the path of anger leads only to loss. The final chapter of Wild Bill Longley's life was written the moment the rope tightened around his neck, but the lesson of his story continues long after the legend faded. He is remembered not for bravery, but for the cost of choosing violence. Not for greatness, but for the dangers of pride. Not for fearlessness, but for the struggle of a man who never learned peace. Bill Longley wanted to be remembered forever, and he was just not in the way he hoped.